When my wife and I first got married, money was tight. We had a small apartment in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where nobody locked their doors. Actually, I'm not that sure if nobody locked their doors because I didn't go around trying to open everyone's doors. It wouldn't be such a great neighborhood if I did. Anyway, even though we loved the location, it was pretty far from work for both my wife and I. To make matters worse, our old car was on its last leg. It was breaking down regularly, and when I brought it to the auto shop, the mechanic told us that it would be cheaper to simply get a new car rather than doing the repairs. I discussed it with my wife later that night. She's a social media manager for a tech startup, so she's on Facebook all day. Therefore, she knows it inside and out. She suggested that we check Facebook Marketplace for a used car. I agreed, since it seemed like a good way to save money. After scrolling around for 10 or 20 minutes, we saw a posting for a 2014 Ford Taurus for a ridiculously good deal. It was in great shape, although it had over 100,000 miles on it. A small drawback considering the price. My wife was skeptical, since the deal seemed too good to be true. But I figured it was worth it, at least to check it out. We sent a message to the seller, making sure to insist on a test drive. He replied after about an hour, and agreed to arrange a test drive for the following day. My wife had to work that day, so I went alone. We agreed to meet at a Walmart parking lot on the other side of town. I had to take the bus, since our old car was in no condition to be driven. As I made my way towards the parking lot from the bus stop, I noticed a man standing next to a car that matched the one in the ad. That must be him, I thought to myself. He noticed me as I got close and offered an awkward wave. I waved back politely. "Hey, we spoke through Facebook?" I said. Yes. You're here for the car. I'm Raymond," he said nervously. He was a young man, probably mid-20s. Large, but not in an intimidating way. In fact, he had kind of a baby face. One thing did strike me about this guy, though. He was nervous. And I mean really nervous. He was actually shaking. But it was probably none of my business, so I didn't worry about it. We jumped into the car and started the test drive. I was immediately struck by how clean and tidy the car was. The strong scent of bleach burned my nose. It makes sense to clean a car before selling it, I get that, but this was on another level. You would have to smell it to understand. That being said, the car was great otherwise. It was just as described, and it seemed to be in great condition functionally and cosmetically. The bleach smell would wear down over time, so it wasn't a deal breaker. I bought the car on the spot and paid in cash. After transferring ownership of the car, I dropped the seller off at the bus stop. I was about halfway home when I noticed the flashing lights of a police car in my rearview mirror. After I pulled over to the side of the road, the officer approached my window. "License and registration, please," said the officer. I handed him my license and the freshly printed papers for the car. He glanced at them for a few minutes and handed them back. Then he said, "Looks like you just took over the registration for the car today." "Yes, sir. I just bought it," I replied. "The reason I stopped you is that this car matches the description of one that was used in a murder. Do you mind if I take a look?" The gears started turning in my mind, and everything started to make sense. The too good to be true price, the nervous seller, and of course, the strong smell of bleach. This was it. I bought a car from a murderer. I immediately told the officer everything. Luckily, he believed me, and of course it was not difficult to track down the previous owner of the car. I thought I might be asked to testify or help with the investigation in some way, but the call never came. From what I heard on the local news, the seller ended up getting life in prison for murder, and it turned out he used the car to dump the body. They found traces of blood in the trunk and throughout the interior. I guess he didn't use enough bleach. This happened when I was in high school. I went to the largest school in my city. There were at least a few thousand students, so it was easy to get lost. Even until my final year, I would meet people in my class who I swear I had never seen before, only to find out that we'd been going to the same school this whole time. Maybe part of that is on me for not being more social, but that's another story. Facebook was still relatively young back then, and it had just finished taking over my school. I was getting tons of friend requests from my classmates that I'd gotten to know throughout the years. This was back when social media friends were all people who you actually know in real life. Imagine that. I will have to admit that I did enjoy that little dopamine hit every time I saw a new friend request pop up. And I would eagerly accept each and every one with little consideration. One day, I got a request from a guy named Michael. His profile said that he was a student at my school, and we had a lot of friends in common. I clicked accept, not giving it a second thought, even though I didn't recognize him. Like I said, it was not uncommon for people to pop up who I had never met. If we were classmates, then why not connect on Facebook? A few days later, I was doing some homework on my computer. I had Facebook open as usual, and I got a message from Michael.
"Hey, how's it going?"
He wrote. "Hey, good, how are you?" I replied. We then sent a few messages back and forth, exchanging pleasantries mostly, until I eventually said, "How do we actually know each other?" He said that he went to my school, but didn't give much detail otherwise. We chatted for a while longer, then I called it a night, not getting much homework done. When I woke up the next morning, I walked over to my desk and turned on my computer. I had a ton of new messages, at least 30. I excitedly opened them, but was disturbed to find that they were all from Michael. A bunch of them just said "hey," or "why aren't you answering?" I scrolled through them some more, and they got even more vile. Some that I don't even want to say, even some that were outright threats. After that, I decided to take a closer look at his profile. First off, I noticed that in his profile picture, he looked much older than high school age. He must have been at least 25, with a beard and baseball hat. Also, he had lots of pictures, but none of them included anyone that I could recognize from school. Starting to feel suspicious, I looked at our mutual friends so I could ask around at school that day. I went to school, and when lunch hour came, I headed to a spot in the hall where my friends usually meet. It was a wide open square section, with lockers on all sides. I talked to some of the people who were friends with Michael on Facebook. Nobody had heard of him. I guess I was not the only one who blindly accepted friend requests from strangers. By then, I was pretty sure that Michael was a creeper, and I was feeling nervous. He knew enough about me that if he wanted to find me, he could. The rest of the day dragged on. I dreaded the thought of checking my Facebook messages. My school had a strict no cell phone policy, so I couldn't check until later. After school, I went home and nervously turned on my computer. I opened Facebook and was surprised to find that Michael's profile was gone. He had deleted it. Part of me was relieved, but in a way, it was even more scary to know that he was out there and I had no way to prove what he had done. I've considered the possibility that it was one of my friends playing a joke, but I don't think so. When I looked through his profile, he did have quite a few pictures and over 200 friends, so it would have taken some effort to put that together. I looked over my shoulder for several months after that, expecting to see him hiding in the bushes or something. Fortunately, that never happened, and I never heard from him again. I've always been cheap with money. It's something my mother taught me from a young age. This used to be a point of shame for me, but as I've grown up, it's become a point of pride. Even though I'm reasonably well off financially now, I still keep an eye out for a good deal. Thrift shopping and bargain hunting will likely always be a part of my life. Some call it minimalism, I call it being cheap. I use Kijiji and Craigslist, but usually have more luck with Facebook Marketplace. Sometimes I spend hours scrolling through the free section, hoping to find something good. It's very rare to find anything worthwhile in the free section, but there was one exception. I spotted a post for a free mountain bike on Facebook Marketplace. It looked almost new. It had a red frame with nice big tires and those shock absorbers on the front wheel. I'm not much of a cyclist. I'm not much of an athlete at all, to be honest. But I had been meaning to lose a few pounds, and this might be good motivation. I figured I could try it out and either keep it or sell it for a few bucks. I typed a message to the poster and clicked send. No more than a minute later, he replied. He said his name was Alan and that it was still available. He promptly sent his address and also told me to come by at exactly 8:15 p.m. the following day. It seemed a bit odd that he was so precise with the time, but I figured he was just busy. I typed a reply and asked if we could meet in a public place. It's always a good idea to meet someone in public since you never know who you're dealing with. He replied and said that I needed to pick it up from his house. That was understandable since it was such a good deal. I agreed to meet at his place since it was not far from my work. I finished work at 6 p.m., so I had some time to kill until 8:15, which is when I was going to pick up the bike. I went to a McDonald's for dinner, taking my time in order to run out the clock. However, by the time I finished, it was still only about 7:30. Even though we agreed on 8:15, I figured I would go and see if he was ready. His place was only about 15 minutes away from the McDonald's, so I took off thinking I would be about half an hour early. The neighborhood was quaint. All the houses looked old in a charming way. As I approached his house on the left side of the street, I noticed another car had stopped and a man was getting out. Great, I thought to myself. That must be Alan, just getting home. I walked over to the man and said, "Hi, are you Alan?" No, I thought you were Alan. I'm here for the bike," he replied. Oh great, I thought. He promised it to someone else. What a waste of time. Just then, the door to the house opened and a large man in his 40s stood in the doorway. He was at least 6 feet tall with a thick build. A sinister grin appeared on his face after I turned to look at him.
Please come in. The bike is waiting,
he said. Both of us? I stuttered.
Yes. There are two. Come in and help me get them.
The other man and I exchanged uncomfortable looks. At this point, neither of us believed that there was a bike, or two, or whatever. I jumped back into my car and drove away, Alan glaring at me from his front porch. This may not seem like the most terrifying story ever, but if you could see the way Alan was staring at us, it would make your skin crawl. Also, the ad didn't say that there were two bikes, and I believe that he made this up to lure us into his house. His actual plans will remain a mystery, and that's fine with me.